That was my friend Sterling who just led songs. So I had the privilege of getting to know Sterling this summer. We both interned at a church in Alabama. Shout out to the River Chase Church of Christ. And there during my time, I was driving back to my host family's house the one day, and I was listening to a Tim Keller sermon, and he asked a question that was a simple question, but that really struck me. He said, "What is it you love the most?" And when I thought about that for more than 5 seconds, which enabled me to give more than a Sunday school answer response, well, of course I love Jesus the most, I realized that Jesus wasn't what I wanted the most. He wasn't even, a part of what I wanted the most. You see, this was a rather stressful and difficult time in my life, and so what I really wanted was for this situation to get resolved, for this difficulty to go away, and in the capacity that I did want Jesus, it was just for him to come in and solve this problem. Perhaps if you're honest with yourself, if you look into your life, this is something you see too, or at least seen in different seasons of your life. And so in light of that, we're going to talk about King Jesus the next 2 days in chapel, and I'm going to share things that I've learned from Keller with all of you along the way. Tomorrow we're going to talk about King Jesus, culture, and identity, which is going to build on what we're going to talk about today, which is the problem if Jesus isn't reigning in your life, how to know if he isn't reigning in your life, and how to fix it so that he is. First, the problem if Jesus isn't reigning. So by reigning, I mean your heart's biggest desire, the greatest treasure of your heart. Now this might sound a little interesting if you aren't a Christian or if you're on the fence about Jesus. Why would this be such a problem? Maybe even if you are a Christian, you're sort of, you don't grasp the full weight of why this would be problematic if Christ isn't the greatest love of our heart. After all, it sounds like a religiously churchy people problem. I mean, look at all the people in our culture. There's very successful people who aren't Christians, who don't have Christ as the main objective, the main love of their heart, from athletes to models to actors, political figures, entrepreneurs, business owners. Plenty of people will tell you they're greatly successful and they don't live under the reign of King Jesus. In fact, a lot of those hyper-successful people will tell you the thing you have to do to be hyper-successful is to be obsessed with your craft, to just put all your work and energy into this, to be totally devoted to this, to work really hard at this, and this is how you obtain success, to outwork everyone, to spend all your hours doing this thing. So in light of our culture, you might be, inclined to say, why is this such a big deal? Well, I would answer that by saying, well, you're not living in accordance with reality. And this actually isn't freeing, it's self-destructive. Here's what I mean. Think of it this way. Imagine you're sailing a ship before there's navigation or maps or things like that, and you're wanting to sail down the English Channel, but for whatever reason, you accidentally sail down the Bristol Channel. Now, the Bristol Channel is a lot more rockier, and it's shallow, and before too long, you're sailing down the Bristol Channel, and you run aground on the rocks, your ship wrecks, it sinks, and everybody dies. What would be the cause for this? Why did this happen? Well, you weren't living in accordance with reality. What does that mean? Well, for whatever reason, maybe you were deceived, maybe you were lied to, maybe you had bad information, maybe you navigated poorly, maybe you were just a bad captain. You sailed down the wrong channel. You thought you were in a different channel. You didn't realize how deep the rocks were. So if we can see how obvious it is, how necessary it is for us to live in accordance with physical reality, how much more necessary is it for us to live in accordance with spiritual and moral reality, for us to not run up against the rocks morally? You see, the idea that we can live morally, ideologically, occupationally, however we want, it's just wrong. In fact, it's not just wrong, it's stupid. Because King Jesus reigning over the universe is an objective state of affairs. It's just as real, if not realer, as the depths of those channels and the rocks therein. And if we don't live in accordance with that truth, we run our lives aground on the rocks, morally, ideologically, and occupationally, and we drown. But this runs contrary to our culture, to the narrative in our culture that gets propagated by the Andrew Tates or Elon Musks of the world or other motivational gurus on podcasts, which tell us that we should outwork, outgrind, outthink, outdesign, and outmaneuver others. We sort of have this Mamba mentality that we, sell to our youth and prescribe to them that this is the way your life is worth anything. This is the way you achieve true freedom, right? Whether it be financial freedom or emotional freedom. But constructing one's sense of worth this way only leads to a very fragile identity, an identity which is always in need of performance to feel good about oneself and to validate oneself, where criticism always feels like a personal attack. Needless to say, this cultural narrative is cancerous to our flourishing, and it's self-destructive. This isn't freedom, and this will cause us to run aground on the rocks of life. The philosopher Immanuel Kant would agree. Michael Sandel summarizes him this way: we often think of freedom as the absence of obstacles to doing what we want. But when we, like animals, seek pleasure or the avoidance of pain, we aren't really acting freely. We are acting as the slaves of our appetites and desires. Why? Because whenever we are seeking to satisfy our desires, everything we do is for the sake of some end given outside us. You see, one might think that living for the desires of their heart and chasing down these life goals and trying to attain this status or this career, that's freedom. That's, when I get this, then I'll finally be happy. That's where I am. But Kant calls that slavery to your desires. In fact, the Apostle Paul would agree with that. It's going to lead us to our second point as we look here where the Apostle Paul refers to that. So how do you know if something other than King Jesus is reigning in your life? Well, the language Paul uses in Romans 6, verses 12 and 14 is this: therefore do not let sin reign in your mortal body so that you obey its lusts. And do not go on presenting the members of your body to sin as instruments of unrighteousness, but present yourselves to God as those alive from the dead, and your members as instruments of righteousness to God. For sin shall not be master over you, for you are not under law, but under grace. Look at the royal monarchical language being used here. Sin shall not reign over you, shall not be master over you. Romans 6 is full of this kind of language. Romans 6 is also very clear about something else. Something has spiritual mastery over you. Everyone has some main thing they live for, something that gives them significance, something that's the main reason for being, the main reason they feel worth anything, the main reason they have security or validation. This can be a number of things. It can be power or influence. It could be money or romance. It could be personal independence or the need to have others dependent on you. It could be a number of things, but something makes your life meaningful, like it's worthwhile. But Paul says that whatever that thing is a spiritual master that you have offered yourself to, and you're being controlled by it through inordinate desires. Paul says in verse 12, don't let sin reign, that is, spiritual kingship in your body, so that you obey its desires. So whatever you've given yourself to, whatever you're living for, is controlling you through these desires or lusts of the flesh. Now, lust in our context sort of carries a sexual connotation, and that's not really what's going on here. The Greek word that gets translated lust of the flesh is epithumia. Now, there is a word in Greek that means thumia, and this just means drive or desire. But epithumia means overdrive or over-desire, in which case Paul isn't necessarily talking about a desire for bad things, but an inordinate desire for good things, which is perhaps a better definition of sin than simply missing the mark or doing something wrong. Martin Luther would say, you don't first commit any sin without committing this one, which is to break the first commandment. Something you've set up as an idol in your life that is the reason for every other cause and problem and sin in your life. You see, for Jesus to be king, that means he's the first and primary desire of our heart. There are many good things that God gives us, good blessings that God gives us that we should desire, that are aim-worthy, such as marriage or children or a career or things like that. But they can't have kingly reign over us. That is to say, one of these many good things cannot become an ultimate thing, cannot become the one thing our heart desires the most, the one thing that we're looking to for security, affirmation, and identity. Now, if you've made one of these good things an ultimate thing, that means you've got to have them. You've got to have them for life to be okay. And this is how they control you, these epithumia control you through inordinate desires. So I have 3 tests to see where your spiritual masters lie, and I'm stealing these from Tim Keller. The first is anger. If something blocks you from getting a good thing, you get angry, you get frustrated, you get upset. That's a normal response. But if you set up one of these good things as an ultimate thing, and now something threatens that, you get epi-angry. You blow up. You say things, you look back, you're like, I can't believe I said that. Maybe you have trouble forgiving someone. The second is fear. If a good thing is threatened, we get afraid, we get anxious, we get concerned, get a little worried. But if we set this good thing up as an ultimate thing and that gets threatened, we get so anxious we can't think straight. We absolutely fall apart. We can't control our anxiety. The third one is sadness. If you lose something good, you grieve, you weep, you heal, you recover. But if you set this thing up as an ultimate thing, there's no longer any desire to live if it's gone. There's no reason for going on. Now, I want to be very careful to not discount the reality of mental health struggles, nor am I saying if you have this sort of reaction that this is indicative of some sort of idol in your life. But I am saying that these are symptoms of inordinate desires. And I can only say these three because I've experienced these myself. I've lived in the self-destructive patterns of living for things that weren't the most desirous of King Jesus. Whether it was relationships or friendships or situations that I knew were bad, everybody around me knew were bad, but for whatever reason, I couldn't give them up. Or I played college golf before I got here, and so maybe there I was offering myself to the God of status, or perhaps more deeply to the God of human acceptance, thinking that the status that comes with being a collegiate athlete would somehow give me this human approval that I was unaware to admit that I needed. The point here in Romans 6 is that something has spiritual mastery over you. Something has dominion over you, whether you believe it or not. And only when you do can you have true transformation. Which leads to our final point this morning. How do you make Christ the greatest desire of your heart? How do you have true transformation? I don't want to pretend like I have this answer all worked out. I can only tell you what's worked for me. So I have a short answer and a long answer. We'll do the short one first. I think it begins with honest prayer. There was a point in my life this summer where I just had to be honest with God and say, clearly, God, I don't want you. I mean, that's evident by the way I'm acting. It's not reflected in my actions. I really want you so I can get this thing from you. And then when I have that, I'm going to set it up as an idol and I'm going to sort of forget about you and walk away. And then if that gets taken away, I'm going to come back and maybe pretend to get my life together, maybe pseudo-repent so that really you'll be happy enough to give me what I'm really wanting over here. You sort of find yourself in the cycle that the Israelites go through in Judges, where, they're in a prosperous time, they sort of turn from God and are facing idolatry, and then God sends a famine or something to bring them back, and now they want to repent, now they want to get everything together, and God brings the prosperous time back, and, they repeat, they leave God. Why does that happen? Because they never wanted God in the first place. They didn't want God for God's sake. They wanted God for what He could give them, for the prosperous times. And so if we find ourselves in this situation, perhaps it's just an honest prayer with God. God, I don't want you for you right now, but I want to. Help me to get there. And when that happens, to draw on language from other passages, we become co-heirs with Christ, raised up with Him, seated in the heavenly places, where we're reigning with Christ. We're sharing in the reign of Christ. So for a longer answer, I think it's correctly understanding faith in Christ. Matthew Bates wrote a book on the Greek word pistis, which you might have heard in church context. It's the word that gets translated belief or faith. He argues that this word means more than just belief or faith. It's more than just a mental assent to or an acceptance of a set of metaphysical premises about the God and the state of reality. Instead, we should better understand this word to carry the connotation of pledging allegiance to or surrendering fidelity to. In fact, and if you've had Dr. Burr been in any of his classes, you would know that Bates argues the core message of the gospel, the central tenet of the gospel, is that Christ is king. And every other thing in the gospel, redemption, forgiveness, flows out from this under His kingly authority. So subjects to the king, we pledge our allegiance to Christ alone. Now, if you were going to pledge your allegiance to an earthly king, right, this wouldn't be a mere tipping of your hat. Like, yes, I understand you're king. No, you would be in total service to the king. No matter how you felt when you woke up that morning, no matter your disposition towards the king, you were totally in submission to the king. And so for us to submit to King Jesus in the same way, it isn't a mere tipping of the hat to recognize Christ's kingship. Pledging our fidelity to Christ manifests itself as servitude to Christ because we recognize His kingship. That is to say, Christ is the greatest, most wonderful, beautiful, desirable treasure of our heart, and because of that, we're being led to serve. Of course, that's easier said than done, because we don't always want to serve Christ. We don't always want to do the right thing or go about our day in the way that we know we should. And the times when we don't want to, I would suggest try to do the next right thing. This was advice Dr. Youngblood gave me in his office recently. Do the next right thing. Or as classes that I've had with Dr. Cox I've sat in, when he would say things like, do faithful covenant-keeping activities even when you don't feel like it. You don't feel your way into acting, you act your way into feeling. And eventually, those feelings of love towards Christ will return. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about how these inordinate desires, these epithumia, form and impact our identity, since what we value the most typically becomes our ultimate affirmer and validator. But as for today, we talked about why it's problematic if Christ isn't king over your life, how to recognize if he isn't, and how to fix it so he is. But I will leave you with one question before we go. Do you love Christ? Like actually, like search. Do you love Christ? Is that who you want the most? Is that what you're afraid of losing the most? Is that the greatest desire of your heart? If you think the answer is yes to that, is that reflected in your actions? Is it reflected in the way you pray and the things you pray for? Think about that, and if not, if the answer is no to those things, that's okay. I've wrestled with that too. But we're called to allegiance to the King regardless of how we feel. So I would encourage you to do the next right thing. And before long, you'll experience the love of Christ and know the freedom that comes from service to the King. Have a great day.